This is Long Way to the Top, and I'm your host, Shane Bryan. In the words of the immortal AC/DC, it is harder than it looks. These interviews will give you a glimpse into the lives of the artists that we've sung along with, danced and rocked out to. Some go deep into their past and others celebrate their recent releases. But all of them show that regardless of who you are, it's always a long way to the top. Rose Tattoo are coming back in 2024 with their Southern Stars reboot tour after having to postpone the tour through the second half of 2023 due to some health issues with Angry that laid him low. They are back ready to rock your socks off and to honour their commitment to their brothers and sisters. And joining me on the show today, Angry Anderson, Rose Tattoo. How are you, mate?
Yeah, I'm good.
I think last time we spoke, I was doing the Bad Boys podcast. That was a couple of years ago now.
I tell you what, isn't it funny that I've just finished an interview down there, and the bloke was telling me that he asked me two things, I'll tell you. He asked me, why haven't I done a podcast up until now? And if I was to do a podcast, that would be the perfect name for it. But the other thing, the support band on the gig we were talking about is called Bad Dad Orchestra.
Absolutely. I'm a massive fan of them. We actually had them in the studio. All 9 of them playing. It was sensational. Absolutely sensational, yeah.
Oh, really? What was it, like jazz?
No, they rock. They do rock. They've got a full orchestra. I mean,
They got brass?
Yeah, they got a full orchestra as well. I mean, full sax, trombone. Yeah, they are incredible musicians. And they're just dads. They got together as a support group for one another. Absolutely incredible.
Wow. What a great story.
Incredible. Yeah. Very interesting story.
All of a sudden, I wanted to do all the gigs, but I suppose that's already been taken care of. But
they would be the ideal band for you to tour with because they just get it. They completely get it. And they just did a brand new single with Ian Moss's son.
Really? Wow, that's interesting.
Yep. No, they're great.
Yeah, can't wait. Do you know the first time I went to Launceston, I was there. This will all be in the book. I was there on a bus trip. Back in the day, if you were a wayward lad and you came to the attention of the local constabulary, they were very supportive because there weren't that many kids out on the street in those days. Anyway, myself and a few mates, came to the notice of the local law, and one of the solutions, if you like, or part of the remedial process they had was they referred you to certain youth clubs, and they said, we're going to check up on you, right? So they made sure you joined this local youth club and you attended at least 1 out of 2. They'd let it go to 3, but if you missed a couple of meetings in a row, they'd come round to your house. And it was a wonderful support program that the police ran. So anyway, our local and closest was the West Coburg Baptist Church. And they ran a youth program, like a youth club, they called it. And the minister of that church, and I used to go to church and go to the youth club, and they took us on a bus tour of Tasmania. So I was in my early sort of like teens, so probably about 15 or 16 at the time, and so we did this bus tour around Tasmania as a youth part of the youth program, if you like. And I remember we went swimming off Launceston, and the water was orange.
But there is actually, if you go to, say, St. Helens and Bay of Fires, all the rocks around there are orange. And it's actually something that it's a natural occurrence.
like an algae.
Goes into the rocks, onto the rocks. Amazing looking when you look at it.
True story. We went to St Helens, and um, uh, for the evening meal, we went down to the jetty to see the boats come in, and it was the first time I'd ever had crayfish. And we each got a box of fish and chips at the end of the wharf there, and they were bringing the crays up out of the holds of the boats and throwing them straight in the tubs to boil them. So they were that fresh, and so they picked out like the small tails for us, like kids. So we got this box, and it had a tail in it. It was the first time I'd ever had crayfish. I couldn't believe the experience of it. And it had a daub of butter on it, and these big, fat, thick chips.
Yeah, yeah.
And about 2 inches, at least 2 inches, maybe 3 inches of a slice of white bread. And so, and we got a bottle of Coke, I think, or cordial, I think, possibly. And there was these women from the church down there, and we just lined up, and we all got a box of food. And I thought to myself at the time, true story, I thought, this is heaven. And I thought, this is where I'm gonna, when I'm famous, because I knew, I decided I was going to be famous at that young age.
Yeah.
Which a lot of kids do in my situation. Like you invent this life for yourself as an escapism from whatever you're trying to deal with. And I thought, I remember when I first went to work for Blundstones, but every time we went there as a band, prior to working with Blunnies, I used to tell the boys about this place called St Helens. I said, it's just the most amazing place. And there's, as you know, only too well, there's several towns along the East Coast which are right on the water. And the one I looked at buying into, there was just one road. I can't remember the name of it now, but I remember the people from Blundstones took me there, and it was like sort of, I went there, and it wasn't during summer, and it reminded me of some of the coast that I fell in love with in Ireland and parts of Britain. Just the physicality of it, it was just beautiful, and I thought,
it's beautiful. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
So if I win lotto, or when I win lotto, I'll be coming down there and buying me a box.
Well, you've got a few days because you're heading down here in March, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. So you might be, if you win lotto this week, you might just stay here.
I've always promised myself, and I like I said, I realised that my association with Blundstones wouldn't run forever, but I certainly spent enough time on the island to ever since that bus trip, I've had this real love, deep abiding love particularly for St Helens, but because it struck me so deeply. And it was one of the, like I said, that just that occasion with the meal, it was just one of those things. And one of the funniest places too, which goes back to, and this will all be in the book, was Ooze.
Now, funny story, my grandparents actually lived in Ooze, and that was where my childhood was, coming to Tasmania, staying in Ooze for 2 weeks, which, is a long time to spend in Ooze because there's really nothing there.
Really, because it's different, isn't it? Well, it's different, it's like, I remember, and we stayed there, and we walked up this path to the local church or the church we went for evening prayers. And and it was kind of like spooky in a way, because it was, we walked up this, I remember walking up this slight hill. I'm pretty sure it was bluestone, like a lot of churches were in those days. There was a graveyard and blah, blah. And Ooze, and I remember, isn't it funny about sensations or your sensory memories? And I remember the curious look of a lot of the land around there. It's got a sort of like a taint to it, a colour sort of, but it was the smell, it was the aroma
Yeah.
that was in the air, and it was quite different to anywhere
Yeah,
else.
and it's funny because my grandparents are actually buried at that church that you're talking about. And I remember as a child going up to that church as well. And yeah, it's sensational. Yeah. It was like an old English church, you know?
Yes,
And it was just like, it was like one of those memories just etched into your brain. Yeah.
yes, yes. Dare I use the word indelible?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, but yeah, I just thought, yeah, wow, this is such a unique place.
Yeah, very much so. We loved Tassie when we took a drive around in 2021. We ended up deciding that that was where we wanted to come back to and live here. So we did. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and everyone says to me, where's your favorite place to holiday? And I say, well, I'm like here. This is where I loved holidaying here. I came here and holidayed. I loved it. So yeah, it's here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I share that experience with you because, but later, without getting too deep and meaningful about it, later in years, 20 years ago, I entered into therapy first of all, we went there as marriage counselling because we realised by that stage that the marriage was floundering. And so it went there. It went into therapy for that, and ended up both of us having therapy to deal with our respective childhood trauma, damage, whatever, and which we both shared. Which I realise now is what drew us together in the first place. And the reward for that was like 4 beautiful children. So even though the marriage didn't survive. But we went into how those sensory memories are so important, and how they affect us on a very, very deep. Because that whole bus trip was an escape from me, from my reality. Because I was not living at home for those few weeks, and I was traveling through this wonderland, and that experience, which is why I love to drive around the island, is because that it's lived with me, and it gave me so much relief from pain, the diversion, but the sensory perception, or the sensory experience. Sorry, the only thing that I've experienced since then that's added to it, but many, many, many years later, of course, is getting a glimpse of the amazing wilderness, like on the West Coast.
Yeah, on the West Coast.
Having seen some, lots of films, feature films, where Tassie's been, even though that was a really dark one, the one about the prisoners, which is a wonderfully put together film, but it's quite dark because they end up eating one another.
Eating each other.
So there's a darkness.
Exactly. And, talk about heritage. It's interesting. And the tour that you're doing at the moment is actually the Southern Stars reboot, I guess. That's what you call it. And the Southern Stars album was very much looking back at our heritage.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I realise, because we're in the last days of the band, because, we'll wind up in a couple of years, when it'll be a 50-year anniversary in 26. So that's a good time to bow out. And I think it's appropriate too, because I think the writing's on the wall, the relevance, etc., etc. And being an incurable romantic, what I wanted to do was to reignite the spirit of Eureka within the Australian people, so that we can. So I realise that each of us as individuals should, and must, and it's part of our obligation to the divine for having, like, we didn't ask for the gift of life, but we certainly enjoy it. So I wanted to reignite as much as I could the spirit that really built the nation, and to stick my middle finger up at the the apologists and the people who would seek to, and they're doing a very successful job of it, particularly with our young, of making us somehow embarrassed or ashamed of our past. I mean, everyone. It's kind of like when you're into a relationship. You know, particularly some people who haven't thought through, or who haven't had enough experience in relationships to realize that when you meet someone, they've already got a past. So you either accept that totally without reservation. So and then you can't then, or you shouldn't, reproach them later on. Oh yeah, but you did this. Oh yeah, but you did that. You were with other people before me. Well, hello. You know, it's like that's what living a life's all about. You know, it's like, so everyone has a past, and the idea that we don't learn from that is absurd. And one of the things that you're going back to therapy, one of the things that you do learn that's so liberating, so illuminating, is that the past already happened. You can't change it, but you can change your perception of it.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's a really important point too.
And it gives pay to that wonderful philosophy that you can't change anything until you change yourself, and then you change everything.
I mean, you know, we can apologize, but it really means nothing because we weren't actually there at the time. It wasn't us doing it.
No, absolutely.
So all we can do as humanity, as a nation, is just say, okay, we accept what has happened. We're sorry, but now let's move forward in whatever format that looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I put my, when I say wait, I mean, it won't be that pompous, but I've given my support some years ago to the likes of, well, predominantly Warren Mundine, but then through Warren into Jacinta. And because they're part of the solution. And this is another great lesson I learned very, very early on in the piece, that, and I read it somewhere, that if you aren't part of the solution, you are part of the problem, because indifference or inaction is apathy, in other words, which I wrote that, I've written that actually into a song. I'm just trying to think of what it was, but it doesn't matter. But because apathy is such a destructive emotion, or lack of emotion, if you like, that you could argue the philosophic point of that forever. But yeah, so if you don't care about something, that's as damaging as if you demonstratively work to bring about, you know, like a negativity, or try to, like today's, and again, you know, really complex. I don't know whether we've got the time, but there is so much. I remember I've said for years, since my days with Midday, when I was, most of my segments were about youth and youth difficulties or situations, etc. And I remember saying there, and I'd sat down with a group of teachers and parents that were purposefully concerned about the condition of children at school. So we're talking about the mid to the sort of late 80s, because we did a series of segments with the same group of people, and or similar groups of people, about the negativity that children were being subjected to. And of course, it's got tenfold worse these days. I mean, we are, one of the, I've noticed on FacePart, they're starting to really promote 1 in 5 people will have a mental illness, and in 10 years it'll be 3 in 5. And so they're reinforcing the idea that you will have a mental illness, but we have the solution for you. You know, it's like, well, how about resilience? How about teaching kids not to succumb to their weaknesses, but to build on their strengths? something as simplistic now as like they want to take sport out of school because it's competitiveness or the competition of sports in school. It turns men toxic. Masculinity, it doesn't happen to the girls, but what it does to the girls, because they've got that covered too, they're starting to say, well, what it does is they build up unrealistic expectations of achieving something in their life with their life. So we're very much in the early days of them, creating the utopian 1984 that we were warned about so many years ago.
And it's funny because, the Southern Stars album was released in 1984, and yet everything that you talked about on that album is still relevant today.
Oh, jeez.
40 years on. So it's almost like we've learnt nothing in 40 years.
Well, thank you for your keen observation, because as the lyricist and the singer, the voice on that album, I'm really flattered by that. I'm a little emotional about it. Well, because it was, and I think it's true. And again, not wanting to sound overly self-important, but I think when you allow yourself to be, my mother always said, she's a deeply religious woman, and she always said, always remember, Gary, that we're guided by an unseen hand, and we listen to the voice, and the voice is within all of us. And of course, she truly believed, and I'm not disputing this, that it's the voice. I say it's the voice of the divine, but she always used to call it, of course, the voice of God. But I realize I've written always in the romantic sense. In other words, I am naively romantically naive, and I write in that. Even now, we're writing songs for a recording with this lineup, and I'm writing about the things that are going on today, the deceptions, the betrayals, the contradictions, and of course, you have to be a little careful, if not clever, and I'll use the word clever, to, as you alluded to, the lyrics on Southern Stars. I don't think, like, they're not preachy, they're not sort of authoritarian, as in, well, this is the way it really is. I've always thought great lyricists provoke thought and an emotional response. And I remember back in the beautiful days of the 60s, apart from Dylan's voice, his style of guitar playing, which was very much that Midwestern, jangly sort of, not so much country, but very, very country.
Very, yeah. No, yeah.
Well, what became known, yes. So it had elements of you're going back to sort of like, I suppose, early British music, talking about folk, but it was brought there by the people that now inhabit, the Appalachian mountain range, or because as you know, the Appalachian people, they go through, like, I think 6 states. And they're all mountain people, and they have their own music, and then they have that wonderful style of clog dancing and the fiddle and the piano accordion, because they were all traditional instruments, but they were easy to carry. And very few people in those days had a piano. I mean, although even some did. Some of those early recordings I've heard, you can hear a badly out of tune piano. And because they would have lugged it up into the mountain. Anyway, long story short, I remember hearing Dylan, and I mean that the prophecy, if you like, how prophetic and that resonated. I don't think anyone, I certainly didn't articulate that process, intellectual process of like, I was reacting to what he said, the emotional response that it triggered off in me, like the hard rain's going to fall. Well, the first album was fantastic. In fact, the first time I heard Song for Woody, I cried. I just cried. And because because it's so, there's a sadness about it, a poignancy, if you
It's
like.
lyrics that have a truth in that sort of rock you to the core. And I think they're the ones that stand the
Yeah,
test of time.
yeah,
Like We Can't Be Beaten.
yeah,
The mind is still free. His mind is
yes.
still free.
So he's always been, as a lyricist, he's naive because he was just a young bloke and he hadn't, even though he was paying homage to his his hero of inspiration, or his inspirational hero, um, this guy that had walked the roads and ridden the trains and all those romantic cliches. But Woody Guthrie actually did that. He lived in tramp camps on the side of railways, and that's how they, if they were caught, they were beaten by these gangs of people who were put on trains to stop them free riding, etc. And interesting, actually, isn't it? I've always thought about that. Even the title, and it just occurred to me then, which is a thought that I've had other. His early work was called Freewheeling, and it's about spirit, and it's about the freedom that exists in all men, so they can enslave. This is a very romantic notion, but I often think of it when I think of Julian Assange. But they've prisoned his body. But you listen to some of the stuff that people that have talked to him, and they've sort of. There's a famous actress that used to visit him all the time. His name escapes me, but she made recordings of him speaking. So they haven't killed his spirit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just in terms of because you're talking about what inspires you there. Is there any artist at the moment that you're listening to now that inspires you?
Taylor Swift.
Taylor Swift. Oh, why is that? That's interesting.
There's a tinge of sarcasm attached to that, is there not? I just no. I can't think of. A lot of who I'm listening to. Obviously, I listen. I live in the past. Why wouldn't you at 76? Because of the era of the music that was produced. But some of the things that I'm listening to now, particularly that comes out of musically, there's a band over here called Palace of the King, which is in the same stable under the same management that we have. Scotty Crawford, he's got them on his, he's got other stalwarts. So he's got the Baby Animals and he's got Boom Cross Shapper and that. And whenever I see them play live, I always enjoy their performances. But there's not a lot that I can think of. The things that I'm sort of watching on the tablet or the iPad, they're these young American, like there's these three impossibly beautiful young blonde girls, and they come from a musical family, and they sing beautiful harmonies, apart from the fact that they're real cool to look at. But the songs are really, really good. There's another couple of guys, they're two brothers, very quirky. They've got a big song. Their big song at the moment, and it's broke them through because they've got a huge podcast following, is about being overtaxed, which is, when you think about it, isn't that wonderful that these young guys, they don't look barely out of their teens, but yeah,
they'll sell very well.
Yeah, they're onto it, and I really love a lot of the bluegrass Appalachian sort of I lost interest, sadly, but I've regained the interest in American folk, country folk sort of, where there's a lot of acoustic guitars, beautiful harmonies, and some very thought-provoking songs about life in their life. And I think that's the wonderful thing about the music but on a contemporary level, even though they are contemporary to that genre of music, there's nothing that really interests me or excites me or impassions me.
Well, let me tell you, when you see Bad Dad Orchestra in Launceston, you will be absolutely blown away.
I'm gonna be.
Yeah. They're the next big thing, I reckon. If they're given the opportunity, they'll become massive.
Yeah, mate. I'm so looking forward to it.
And here they are sitting in Lonnie, 9 guys just working together and doing the work that you've done. With men's groups and that. And these guys, they're the next. They're the real thing, the real deal.
I'll tell you, I stand corrected, because one of my favourite songwriting and performing is the Wolf Brothers.
The Wolf Brothers are great, aren't they?
Oh, extraordinary. I love the way, apart from the fact that they're so much fun, I was used to be for years with their management, Steve White management, Steve he's one of the old school, he's a beaut bloke, he's honest, he just works so hard. And you can see that with the Wolf Brothers. But I came across them many, many, many years ago when they just started out. And Steve brought me, he said, listen to these guys, I'm going to work with them. So it was a long time ago. And I just think one of the things that I love about is their great sense of melody, but the songs they write make me cry. Some of the songs make me cry. So that, to me, as we've already established, is if songwriting, singing can do that to me or to anyone, there's something much, much deeper within that, because it's triggering a response in you. Anyway, how do we get onto that?
Well, look, just in wrapping up, I just wanted to mention some dates that you've got coming up. So across Tasmania, Dodgers Ferry Hotel, of course, at Dodgers Ferry, Country Club Showroom in Launceston on the 2nd of March and the 3rd of March, Shearwater Resort in Shearwater. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And do you know, because I don't, which gig, or I'm excited about the Bad Dad Orchestra.
So far as I know, Bad Dad Orchestra is supporting you in Launceston. Not sure about the other areas, but
wow,
definitely. Yeah. I'll send you a link to a video that you can have a look at.
Thank you.
You'll be blown away.
I was going to impose. I was going to, because I'd love to. Apart from anything else, and getting back to those simplistic motivations, if you like, triggers, even though I don't like using the word trigger these days, because it's taken on such a negativity with me, I'm triggered, my anxiety's triggered. Yeah, really. But Bad Dad Orchestra, what a great name.
What a sensation. Good luck on the tour.
Thank you.
And all the best for Southern Stars. 40 years on, sensational, and you guys are still going strong.
Well, that album was written as a result of being a young man who had, like they say, traveled forward and shit.
Yeah.
We'd done Europe, we'd done America, we came back. We were in the last days of our relationship with Alberts, as it was, because that was the last album we did with Alberts. And quite honestly, at the time, I thought this was the end of Rose Tattoo, because the original members that were, well, some of them, most of them, were still around, but they had no interest after America of continuing, particularly Peter. And so I thought, well, I was going to go on to form another band that would take up from where Rose Tattoo left off. So it was our final, as far as I was concerned, it was our final statement. And I really wanted to, I because it was only Geordie and I involved, and so that we had a lot more control over the content, so to speak. I wanted, if it was our final statement, I wanted it to be about the things that I hold most dear, which is family and country, and the love of everything that is Australian, and which is why I wrote. We do about four songs in that, around about that sort of. We do 1854 from the Blood Brothers. We do Freedom's Flame. We do Southern Stars. As a way of leaving a mark, hopefully, on the unconscious. In other words, repeating what we set out to say with that album today. We're going to repeat that with the live performances by saying, we have a lot to be thankful for, but we have a lot to be proud of about how the country has come. And I know this sounds, again, romantic or naive, but we are right now in dire straits. We are in real trouble. We are, if they succeed, we'll lose all that. And I want people to realise that they're so good at this, and that they're getting away with it. And if we don't, you have a look at what's happening in Europe and America now. People are starting to resist and fight back. And that's what I want to happen here in Australia, is that what we have is so amazing, so wonderful. I'll leave you with the one thought, which I do say every night on stage: the great wisdom, and until a man has found something he'll die for, he has not yet begun to live. And that's a philosophy that once I read that as a young man, I thought that's, because it doesn't mean, it's not inviting you to die for something you believe in, but it's inviting you to live as if you would die for that, Anyway.
Yeah, look, it's been great.
As always, it's been wonderful. Thank you.
I really appreciate your time, Angry. Really, thank you. Thanks for chatting.
Thank you, and I appreciate yours too, brother. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Long Way to the Top. Hit plus or follow to subscribe to the podcast, and head over to Facebook at The Long Way to the Top Podcast and give us a like. Keep on rocking, and I'll catch you on the next episode of Long Way to the Top.